over the years, what I've realized is that well-being isn't just these individual elements, it's all of it together. Now I think of well-being as a much more integrated concept where we are not well if the environment isn't well, and I am not well if there are people suffering, and there are limitations to that in a big way, but trying to view wellness as this much greater holistic concept rather than me in this physical body with this mind, making sure that I'm doing the best for myself.
Welcome to Priorities, the podcast about the things in life that really matter. I'm your host, journalist and coach Lily Silverton, and each week I'll be asking a new interviewee to open up about the things that are important and unimportant to them. What takes first place in their life, what they couldn't care less about, and what they'd like to work on a little bit more. Will you agree with their priorities? Will they make you reevaluate your own? Let's find out. My guest today is author, wellness advocate, and yoga teacher Annie Clarke. Annie is the creator of the hugely successful blog and brand Mind Body Bowl, which she set up following a period of illness in 2012. Using a holistic and off-the-mat approach to yoga, Annie teaches and runs retreats across the world. While these are on hold for now, in January, Annie, before anyone had even really heard the word lockdown, launched her online yoga studio, The Practice, with the aim of making her teachings more accessible to all. Along with her partner Will, Annie also co-hosts a brilliant podcast, Can We Just Ask?, which takes a bite-sized but in-depth look into social and environmental issues. Welcome, Annie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Really good, thanks. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. It's lovely to have you here. My first question is, where are you at right now this minute on a scale of 1 to 10? How are you feeling?
Oh, I've just been sitting in the sunshine, so I'd have to say a pretty solid 8. There's nothing that charges me up like the sunshine, and I just stole a few minutes. So I feel very, very lucky for that.
Do you tan easily? Do you wear lots of sun cream, or are you one of those people who can sit outside and happily be in the sun for a while?
So I grew up not wearing very much sun cream because my skin didn't tend to burn. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I realized that I was probably sending myself on a fast route to aging, and that I should probably look after my skin generally. And so now I like to get a little bit of sun without cream on, but I'm definitely now a bit of a religious sun creamer, and found some really beautiful natural ones that I really enjoy. So yeah, somewhere in between. I tan, but I try and still look after my skin.
All right, we're going to kick off with your first priority, which for me, you've said is friends. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I have some wonderful friends, and I've been thinking a lot about my relationships over the last couple of years and how those have shifted. And I've been incredibly fortunate that through the last probably 5 or 6 years, I've made some really, really wonderful newer friends, and have also managed to maintain the friendships that I grew up with. But what I've really noticed is how I have different friends who, with each of my sort of different friends, I have different relationships. And so I really enjoy nurturing the different elements of those friendships. So I have the friends that I will speak to on the phone. I'll have friends that I only see a couple of times a year, and I'll have friends that we're in sort of daily communication with when I'm not being useless on my phone. But one of my priorities, which has, unfortunately, I'm going to dive in and mention lockdown so early on, but one of the things that lockdown has sort of reiterated for me is how deep rooted those friendships are, and that we don't actually have to always be doing things together and speaking to one another all of the time, but actually having really intentional conversations and setting aside really wonderful time, dedicated time together is so much more valuable. And so one of my priorities at the moment is to really focus on that intentional time. So not overcommitting, not saying yes to all the little bits and bobs, but just to really take time to enjoy and support and love and be loved by the wonderful friends that I have in my life. So yeah, that's one of my priorities at the moment. And as we sort of have a little bit more freedom to see one another, I really didn't want to get swept up into that saying yes to everything, and then having to either cancel or try and rush off to different places. So just really carrying the pace of what the last couple of months has allowed me to move at and carry that into the way that I spend time with people, I think.
What's your perfect friendship date?
So I've definitely realised that being in smaller groups or on a one-to-one, in a one-to-one situation is my ideal. We actually spent some time once we were allowed to do so. We were very lucky and managed to drive across to France a couple of weeks ago, and then when we were allowed to do so, my friends decided to join, and we had some really, really extended time with people. And I think actually it doesn't matter what we're doing, it's just that extended time. And it meant that we did things together that we wouldn't normally do if we were just meeting for brunch. So even if it was just sort of pottering around the house or playing sport or going for a run or doing yoga or just sitting and having a longer meal rather than that kind of hour that you can catch for brunch with people. I think it doesn't really matter what we're doing, but just not clock watching. Anything that we can do together where we don't have to watch our phones or our watches, I think makes a huge difference. It's definitely again what I'm trying to make space for.
Giving people and giving yourself people time rather than little snippets of yourself or getting tiny snippets of them.
Yeah, and I think it allows, even with your closest friends, when I certainly find that when we're seeing each other for shorter periods of time, you still default into this sort of surface level conversation. And a group of my friends, we realized that what we were doing when we'd meet up for dinner is that everyone would do like a one-line update, and you just sort of relay your sort of news or lack of news in one line, because that was all there was time for around the table. And we'd gone for ages without any sort of depth to our conversations. And so I think just having the time to move beyond that and actually really see how someone's doing and what you can do to be a good friend for them if that's what they need, or to have fun, or to just talk about things that matter to you, beyond kind of how work's going and what you had for breakfast.
Yeah, completely. I think it also gets you out of that, as you say, the one-liner thing is often about achievements or like what you've been doing or what you haven't done. So there's a lot of that energy around short catch-ups, whereby, as you say, when you can spend a bit more time with someone, you're actually connecting with them and seeing what's going on rather than listening to the highlights or giving them your highlights that maybe you then realize they didn't want to hear because something's going on for them that's not a very useful highlight to get right now, or the other way around.
So actually one of the things that I noticed about the difference between my friends who, my older friends, friends that I've had since childhood, and those that I've met in sort of more recent years is that element actually about the achievement thing, because we grew up, those of us that grew up together, school was for us certainly about achieving in lots of ways, even if we didn't realize it at the time. Whereas that isn't something that comes into my kind of adult relationships, those that have been more recent. So it's a really interesting kind of nuance between those different friendships. And so it's certainly something that I've sort of learned through the relationships in later years that I'm then using to slightly repattern the friendships and the relationships with those that I love so dearly and have done for so many years, but to ensure that we sort of connect over different things.
You're completely right about that difference as well between newer friendships and older friendships. I guess because when you've grown up with people, especially if you've been at school with them, you have your pattern set with them to some extent, and they see you as 12 or younger or whatever age you were when you met them, and vice versa. And you think you know each other already. So there's none of that explaining your childhood or explaining what you did in your early 20s or whatever it is, because you kind of know it-ish. Whereby when you make friendships, when you're a little bit older, often you do go straight into quite a deep emotional level because you're getting to know each other. It can be like a first date.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting realization to have, but actually one that I think has been really fruitful from both, for all of those different relationships, because there's so many things that I've learned from my older friendships that I bring into my new ones, but then also the other way around. I think it's we think about relationships and how we have to sort of work at relationships. I don't think friendships ever fall. Well, in the way that we talk about them, friendships don't really fall into that category. So you would expect your friends to talk about working at their relationships with their partner, perhaps. But actually, friendship takes a lot of work. The idea that we're all going to evolve in our lives at the same rate and the same pace and in the same direction is in most cases quite unrealistic. And so I'm definitely finding that adapting to or adapting our friendships as we grow and get older and change and our priorities shift is it takes work, but it's, of course, rewarding and worth every moment of effort. So yeah, that's certainly why it's a priority for me.
It's a great priority. As you say, it does. You need to put the effort in, like with anything.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, let's come on to your next priority, which is well-being. Quite a buzzword thrown around. I use it myself in relation to my work. And lots of strange connotations, I'll say, alongside it. Tell me, what is well-being to you, Annie?
So it's funny that you said that around the buzzwords, because, and I hoped we'd have the opportunity to discuss it, because when I put it down on paper as a priority, I guess 5, 6, 7 years ago, what I would have meant by that would be very, very different to now. And I think actually the way it would be interpreted would also have been very different to now. But well-being has always been a priority for me in my adult life, and it's something that has shifted massively. So what I knew of well-being in my early 20s was the wellbeing industry in London just starting to kick off, which is probably the first time, where we originally probably crossed paths somewhere along the way. But it all being about this ultimate well-being, this focus on everything that we're putting in our bodies and how we, it was fashionable. And to an extent, of course, it still is. But I think I saw it in a much more superficial light. So I came to wellbeing because I was having a lot of digestive issues and energy problems, as many, many people do. And I was lucky enough to be able to use different tools such as my diet and exercise and practices like yoga to really support my healing from that. But then as I've progressed through that or moved through that over the years, what I've realized is that well-being isn't just that kind of these individual elements, it's all of it together. And actually, while it seems like a very long time ago that I wrote my book, when I look back at that, I looked at 3 different pillars of it, being your mind, your body, and nutrition, how we fuel our body. But now I look at it as one step further, because that was very personal, and it was all about how I had managed to support myself and encouraging other people to do that. Now I think of well-being as a much more integrated concept where it is, we are not well if the environment isn't well, and I am not well if there are people suffering, and there are limitations to that in a big way, but trying to view wellness as this much, much greater holistic concept rather than just me in this physical body with this mind, making sure that I'm doing the best for myself, is looking at well-being as this huge interconnected web of all life. And so taking a much, much bigger challenge.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's complicated as well. Well-being is complicated. There's so many factors involved. It's environmental, it's intellectual, it's social, it's friendships.
Yeah.
So much that goes into it. And this idea that it can be reduced to a green juice and a yoga class is very unfair as well, because you see a lot of people who go for those things trying to find a sense of well-being or balance or happiness, and find quite the opposite, because they realize that they get to that place and they've hung on to a unstable life raft.
Yeah, you've articulated that really beautifully rather than my bumbling around it. But I think that's exactly it. And I think you can hold on. You might start on by holding on to the concept of the green juice and the, whatever it might be that you've been sold as the lifestyle choices that will support your well-being. But when we dive a little bit deeper, and this is where I feel like I've been really heavily supported by my explorations of the practice of yoga, is that really it isn't individual. Nothing is individual. And so how can we expect our well-being to be fully individual? We can take responsibility for ourselves, we have to start, I believe we have to start at home. But I think it would be short-sighted, particularly as somebody that shares yoga and well-being and is in this conversation a lot. It would be irresponsible to say that was enough. And that isn't something that I necessarily would have realized sort of 6-7 years ago, whenever that might have been. So that's what I mean by the priority of well-being. And it would have been very easy to try and break that down to sustainability or social justice or all of these things, but it would be untrue to say that they are my full focus, and trying to really work out how to support the collective holistic growth and progress. And I think that takes looking at all of these different limbs, basically.
Yeah, completely. It's a 360 approach.
Yeah, definitely.
Not that we have anything, either of us, by the way, against a green juice or a yoga class, obviously.
Absolutely. But it's just one of the elements that builds into what I now believe that well-being can be.
I think another thing with the well-being identity, and I'm sure even more so yourself, having been very involved in the industry early on with your blog with Mind Body Bowl, would have experienced this, that many, many people who sell themselves as well-being influencers or pioneers are not actually very well. And this image of well-being as someone who looks a certain way, whose body looks a certain way, whose skin looks a certain way, and so on, is often very far removed from what true well-being is. Because I know lots of people who are what you would consider in a near perfect state of well-being, but don't look it according to what we think of as well-being, or what the advertising world thinks of as well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really good point. And the problem is that wellness looks different for everybody when we do take it back to the individual. And I think one of the things that I found really challenging at the beginning of my journey towards, or my first sort of dipping my toes into pursuing my own well-being, was that I was trying to sort of copy and paste and look around and see what other people were doing and apply it to myself. And there's all these wonderful plans and programs, and they do so much to support to support so many different people. But we are also functioning as completely different individuals in many ways. And so I think there's a place for all of that. But the danger, I guess, is that we attach too much to what we think is right for our well-being without really using that intuition or being guided by people who really understand it. And the danger is that we just kind of fix ourselves to the idea of what well-being looks like and run with it without stopping to check in and go, is this working for me? Does this suit me? What, how can I support myself more fully? And, we're incredibly lucky to be so well connected, but the danger of that is that, we take things on because we see them being published wherever and don't necessarily always stop to check that that's the right choice for us. And I really believe that well-being should empower people to really understand how to support themselves in all areas of their lives, whether that's their physical well-being, their mental well-being, their relationships, their taking their practices beyond themselves and into the world around them. It should be empowering. And if we sleepwalk into this ideal of well-being, then the chances are it's not going to suit everybody. And does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So well-being for you has changed a huge amount over the years. And I know how important social justice and the environment and those areas have been for you and how much you've started working within them. And we connected last year over XR when I was co-programming one of the bridges. What are you doing at the moment? What's really coming up for you at the moment as an area to focus on or put your energy towards? I know that you do a lot.
So I think right now to be really, really present is that in what I think is needed and what I am being challenged by is I'm a white, able-bodied, middle-class yoga teacher. I'm very lucky to have been brought up in a relatively equal society and, being living in the UK since birth. And I have always tried to position my teaching as accessible. But what I've been really challenged by at the moment is really whether or not I'm meeting that intention. So where am I able to do some work to really ensure that what my intention is with the way that I share my practice, whether that is being met by my actions, or whether I've got some work to do. And of course, the answer is that I've got a lot of work to do. And actually, I know that I'm not going to articulate this as well as I did by accident when I was speaking to a friend of mine last week. But we were talking about sort of showing up on social media because I felt hugely resistant to during the peak of the Black Lives Matter wave that we saw spread across sort of all media. When I want to do the work, I like to step away. And I like to do that quietly and personally and really challenge myself. But so I sort of retreated from being involved in the conversation, not because I didn't want to, but because I needed to really do some work. But what I realized as with that and with some other conversations that have been going on over, there's the most incredible movements happening at the moment. And what I realized is that by stepping back and doing the work for myself, that was one thing. But I started to move into that space of sort of fear of showing up imperfectly. And the problem with that is that doing nothing doesn't help anyone. And so I needed to move beyond the fear of imperfection or getting anything wrong or not doing the absolute best, and instead show up and fight for the causes that I believe in, and enable conversations to happen. But rather than resisting where things got sticky, there's so much. But if we think about something like social media, if there is challenge on there, then but how we respond to that challenge is where we grow. And so if I'm not putting myself in the situation where I'm willing to be challenged, then I'm stunting my own growth. And as somebody, with a public profile to a certain degree, running away doesn't support anyone, and it doesn't support the growth of myself nor anybody else. And so what I could do is just start showing up, and in showing up, it will inevitably be imperfect. But the way that I respond to challenges and sticky bits and the bits that I get wrong is where I'm able to contribute to a positive future. And once I had that realization, I felt much more empowered about the way that I can show up, because I was like, no one needs to hear anything from me. My voice has been heard for a long time. Voices like mine have been heard for a very long time. No one needs to hear from me. But running away didn't seem like the right thing to do. So right now, I'm just really trying to challenge myself to learn from conversation. And my boyfriend Will and I have a podcast, a platform called Can We Just Ask? And the whole point of that podcast was to start conversations that matter. And I was like, wait, this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in these conversations. Now I have an opportunity to learn from all these people who are willing to show up and share. And this is a really beautiful opportunity to do just that. So why waste it by running away and tucking yourself away just for fear of getting it wrong? So that's kind of what I'm focusing on, rather than a specific project that I can take ownership of. It's really just trying to learn and grow, and to really hold myself accountable to all of that, because I can't truly claim to live my practice if I'm not living it in the difficult bits. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do. And it's not my time to sell anything off the back of it. It's just my time to be learning and growing, I think.
I think that's crucial. It's the not selling anything off the back of it. It's showing up with the intention of one of the biggest lessons of yoga, right? Being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
Getting into those sticky places, getting into those places in which you're not seeking approval or trying to succeed, but rather just showing up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's releasing. I am historically one of my biggest sort of shadows has been defensiveness. So I'm so sure from what we touched on earlier about that sort of achievement thing, and the idea of someone sort of questioning your achievement or your position on something. My sort of default pattern has always been defensiveness, and it's something I've worked really, really hard over the years that I've had the awareness to realize it, to move beyond. And actually, when you drop that need for approval or to defend yourself, and you're really open to being corrected and to being vulnerable and just showing up without any other intention than to show up and give give energy and commitment to something, then it's really powerful. And I think we are in a world where I feel like we need to we're always pushed to be sort of selling the next thing or having a plan about what's next, and actually sometimes to just be in something and really, really just feel it out and put the work in, but also just kind of go with it and run with it, however uncomfortable it might be, I think is just really powerful. So giving space for that and permission for that, I think is valuable.
Completely. And also that need for approval is so limiting at the end of the day.
Yeah, totally.
So restrictive. I love sleep. Seriously, it's one of my biggest priorities, and I'm a different and much improved person when I get my full 8 hours. So I'm incredibly excited that this season of Priorities is sponsored by Sleep Siren, an independent lifestyle brand fueled by a passion for health, wellness, and great sleep. Sleep Siren brings together science, education, and luxurious products to offer meaningful support to busy people who could sleep a little or a lot better. As the mother of a toddler and having suffered from insomnia on and off my entire life, I know firsthand how helpful Sleep Siren can be at identifying and covering your sleep needs. Whether you're looking to read an expert article on the latest sleep science, treat yourself to some insanely soft silk pajamas, or simply find a luxurious eye mask, Sleep Siren have everything you need to sleep well tonight. If you would like to improve your sleep, I'd love for you to have the same experience as me with Sleep Siren. So they're offering 20% off with the code PRIORITY20. Check them out on www.sleepsiren.com. Thank you to Sleep Siren. Nutrition is a priority for me, and I know that the more plants I eat, the better I feel. However, with a busy life, I, like you I'm sure, don't always manage to get my daily quota of greens. So I'm very happy that this season of Priorities is sponsored by Foga, a new brand that makes plant shakes, pre-portioned blends of freeze-dried fruit and veg that you simply shake up with water or milk to create a restaurant-standard smoothie at home. I'm not really into protein shakes or powders. However, these are genuinely amazing. They're so easy and delicious. Right now, I'm digging the ginger and greens combination, and my daughter is a big fan of berries and cinnamon. They contain 0 extra sugars or chemicals. Through freeze drying, have all the nutrients locked in, and they're whole plant, meaning they have all the fiber of fresh fruit and veg. It's really the lazy person's dream. If you're looking to easily and affordably prioritize your nourishment, then I'd love to find out if you enjoy Foga as much as I do. They're offering £5 off your first box with the code PRIORITIES. Check them out on www.foga.co. That's Foga. Thank you to Foga. Okay, so your final priority is work, which we've already started touching on. So you started off in 2012, 2013 with Mind Body Bowl. So.
I kind of remember, it's all a bit of a blur, but it was about then.
And your work has changed a lot since then.
Yeah, hugely. So I came into the space through food, and then realized that sort of this concept of well-being started to open up a little for me, and then unravel. And in 2015, I was made redundant from a really, really wonderful job that I loved so much. Having just sort of thought, I can really see myself being here for a really long time. And at the time it felt like, how am I possibly going to figure out what I'm going to do? So as I started to run out of savings, I was like, right, I'm going to take the last possible opportunity to go and do a yoga teacher training just before I come back and find a proper job. And I'm the biggest cliche in the world, but the first day on that course, it was the first time I really felt a sense of being in the right place. And I think I'd realized that I'd been on a pathway that I just was doing what I thought I needed to do for so long. And I didn't really mind where it was going to go. I just was like, I like this feeling. I really like this feeling of feeling like this is right. And so I kind of just followed it. And and it's led me, down a windy road to where I am now. But I've been really focusing on sharing yoga in different ways. And at the beginning of this year, I launched an online studio, and the idea with the practice, it's the name of the studio, was to open up the accessibility to the yoga practice. I found that so many people were struggling for either time, money, or just purely geography, and not being near a teacher that they loved, or not having access to a studio. And so we created the practice as a way to sort of to open up that accessibility. And then, of course, COVID happened, and I was incredibly fortunate that I already had an online studio, but I also suddenly lost my sort of USP because everybody suddenly overnight managed to get themselves online, which I couldn't get my head around because it took me about 18 months to set up the studio. I was like, how did everyone learn this so quickly? But it's really brilliant because it has allowed me to stay connected to people during this time, but it's also allowed me the space to focus on other things. So I have a course called The Art of Holding Space, and I had the idea for that for the last sort of 2 years maybe, but never sat down to write it. And so within sort of a few weeks of being at home, I'd managed to write the course, and I'm now sort of halfway through the second group on the course, which is amazing, and feel so lucky to be able to be deepening the connections that building with these communities, and in the place of retreats, which were a big part of what I do, which are obviously off the cards for the moment. It's really lovely to have been able to find other ways to connect with people and keep sharing and keep challenging the way that we show up. And as I said a moment ago, thinking about making yoga accessible, or actually with the art of holding space, what we keep exploring is what that accessibility really means. And all the really important conversations that have been going on about the whitewashing of the wellness industry, like what we can really do to actually move into an accessible space, make the space more accessible. Yeah. So I'm again being challenged to pivot like the rest of the world, but in a way that's actually allowed me to kind of find some things that I've really wanted to do for a long time. And so, at the moment it's a priority to just run with that and enjoy the twists and turns again that I didn't quite expect, as none of us did, but just to lean into them and let them take me wherever they're taking me.
Flexible, off the mat, not just on the mat. That's the thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Your home and work life are very intertwined and were even before lockdown. Yeah. You have your own brand. You work with your partner, your boyfriend, Will. How do you maintain balance with that? What are your hard and fast rules? If you have any.
So we do. Some of them have slipped over the last couple of weeks, actually. Will pulled me up on my phone usage today. I had a period of being really, really strict about when I was on my phone or my laptop, and sort of shutting that as early as possible in the day, basically. And I've sort of let that slip a little bit, but that's kind of, so I guess that's a big part of it, my relationship with technology, and when I switch on and when I switch off. I also try to, it's interesting at the moment because we have quite an open plan space at home, and this morning actually I had a photo shoot, and I realized it was the first bit of work that I have done outside of my home in so long. And usually that's one way that I try to separate it. So if I can get out the house to do my work, I'll do it. Or if I'm working at home, I try to only do that if Will's not here, or my cousin lives with us as well at the moment, if she's not in, just to try and have that separation that, when the people are here, it's a home space. We do use our living room for filming and things. So I try to be really good at always sort of putting things away and just making the space an office when it needs to be an office, and, a home the rest of the time. But it's as everything, it's been really challenged lately. And so the boundaries have blurred a little bit. But if we can move beyond the exception of the last couple of weeks, I think the things for me are, technology and creating the sort of physical environment, and wherever possible, getting out the house to do my work, because it's so lovely to have a home that you can actually step into, like actually physically crossing the threshold of the door to come home. I find really powerful. Whereas if I'm just sat here working, then it sort of rolls into the evening and you don't get that same distinction. And I have definitely got a lot better at it, and committing to my weekends and that kind of thing. So I now pretty much don't work at the weekends most of the time. Whereas I used to just didn't even know what day it was. I'd just carry on and be on, if I wasn't teaching, I'd be on my laptop, and it just, realize that you don't ever take a break, which I think when you're working for yourself is very easy to do.
And so important.
Do you find the same?
Yeah, for sure. I obviously I write quite a lot from home, and before lockdown I'd be out and I'd work from wherever, which I found very helpful. But a lot of my work is done from home, full stop. And it always has been, because I've always been a freelancer, pretty much. Even when I was in magazines, I was still technically a freelancer. So I think I'm so used to it that I don't really know anything else. But I do like getting out the house and working out the house. And I miss running workshops. I miss seeing clients outside the house rather than on Zoom, and all of that, everything that goes along with it. And I'm very thankful that I'm able to keep working.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting thing, because there's sort of there's pros and cons as with everything. But I certainly found it quite cyclical, in terms of I'd go for a little while being like, well, this is actually a really wonderful way to work, and then I'd be like, oh, this is actually quite an exhausting way to work. And then I don't think I opened my diary for about 6 weeks. But kind of then it was like, well, if something comes up, it doesn't matter what time of day it is, I can just do it. So I, would have perhaps less on, or the flexibility, because I wasn't running around and traveling everywhere. So I think that's why the sort of the lines started blurring, to be honest. But yeah, I think having teaching my first in-person class in the park the weekend, and I can't wait to actually just be with other people. I'll probably get home feeling absolutely exhausted.
No, you'll be very energized.
You'll be energized. Really excited for it.
And you did just say you don't work on the weekends anymore, but we'll
that's why I said it quietly. I'm making an exception because the sun's shining.
Yeah, it's a good exception. Annie, what's an area or something that's not a priority for you?
So something that I have realized I'm quite resistant to, but that I'm quite happy to resist, is the idea of competition and comparison. And it's something that I feel like we are so exposed to, and it's very, very easy to get into the space of looking around, particularly with what I do for work and everything that we can see on social media. It could be very, very easy to be constantly criticizing myself for not doing enough, or I remember feeling like I'd absolutely sort of nailed my work-life balance when I was like finally got myself to working Monday to Friday, and then decided that I would also give myself Wednesday afternoons off, because I realized that I realized that I was getting more done in the time that I was working than when I was spreading it out over a longer period of time. And so, taking time to really support myself and my self-care was, Wednesday afternoons were going to be for that. And there was no obligation to make any social plans because most of my friends were working. And then I remember seeing some people probably on Instagram or talking to somebody somewhere, and they were saying how their hours were crazy and they were working so hard to get projects off the ground and this and that. And I started to think, oh, maybe I'm not doing enough. And I was like, I've literally spent the last year and a half trying to get myself to the point where I have this freedom to choose my hours. And now that I've done it, I'm looking around thinking that it's not enough. I was like, this is what I wanted. And so at that point, I was like, you just have to let go. There's, focus on what it is that you want to manifest and what you want to have in your life. And, be inspired by what other people are doing and be inspired by other people's work ethics or commitments to things, but you don't have to take it all on, and you certainly don't have to change direction just because someone's doing something differently. So yeah, that's what I lost interest in. It's kind of looking around too much, and just trying to keep focused, I think, is really, really important.
Definitely. My personal mantra, I guess, would be stay in your lane. And it's what I say to myself all the time with everything, because as you say, especially nowadays where there's so much out there and it's so easy to see what everyone else is up to and what they're doing, and so easy to compare yourself. If you start going down that route, you start losing what it is that you're doing. And as you say, it took a year and a half to carve out some time for yourself, and that's so important, and to have that work-life balance, and then literally in a moment was ready to throw it away, which I very much empathize with as well.
Yeah. And actually, when I think back, it was like a year and a half of saying, I'm going to make this happen. But that was still off the back of probably 4 years before that of not ever thinking that was going to be a possibility. So, it's a friend reminded me of, it's like sometimes you get somewhere and you forget how hard you worked for it. Just remind yourself that you worked quite hard for that. So don't let it go just because because you got distracted.
That's a good friend.
Very good advice. Yeah,
it's very good advice. Finally, what's an area that you'd like to improve on? What would you like to prioritize more?
I think actually finding one of the things that I have noticed, and this is very much a recent thing, I don't think it's something that I've struggled with in the past, but at the moment I would like to focus on focus. So I talked about sort of stepping back and just being, really open to learning. And actually, when you said about sort of staying in your lane, that's a really big part of it. It's like, where is this something that I need to educate myself and learn about, and actually what are things that I can that aren't either my responsibility and this isn't in the context of sort of social justice, it's more just in terms of the way that I set up my work and the sort of things that I want to sort of bring into my business and things. But I think, when we do slip into that comparison space, and you think of all of the amazing opportunities that we have, that so many of us have, sometimes finding the focus to do one thing really well can be a challenge for me. And I sort of have lots of different ideas on the go at once. And one thing that I'm really proud of when I launched the practice is that I said, right, I'm going to strip back everything else and I'm just going to focus on this. And what happened is that I created something that I am really proud of. And so harnessing that intention of focus, I know that when I do that, that it supports, you know, a really positive outcome. And so I'm sort of redirecting myself towards that focus again, but I'd quite like to step back into that space or get myself into that space. So I don't know whether that's really a thing that I would like to prioritize more, but it's just something that I'm really working to find again, so that I can put my energy into something that I can be proud of.
How are you going to do that? What steps are you taking, or are you going to take?
I am sort of redefining my boundaries around the way that I'm working, really committing to my self-care practices, the things that I know that I need to sort of have in place in order to support that. But also going through the sort of things that are sort of on my list of and working out what's really authentic, because I think I'm never going to find focus in the things that aren't. And so I'm working on so I have the Art of Holding Space, which is the course that I do at the moment, and I'm developing a sort of a follow-on course from that at the moment. That's kind of what I really want to focus on, and so I'm just really trying to get clear on what factors into that, and anything that doesn't support that is just let that sort of move to the back burner for now. So it's just a process of getting clear, I think, and then committing.
Yeah, this is what I use the stay in the lane with a lot as well. Is, does this work with what I'm doing?
Yeah.
Or is this just a bit of a distraction that sounds like something nice to do that I would enjoy doing?
Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah.
How good are you at saying no?
I've got so much better. I used to be awful. I tend to carry a lot of guilt by sort of default. So I feel I always want to do something for somebody else, and if I can't or it doesn't work, then I feel very guilty. And I realized again, when this is, you know, when you think of boundaries, that was really, really poorly considered boundaries, and I was really struggled to say no, and all it meant was that I never did anything properly, and so I definitely developed the ability to say no. Actually, the more that I kind of understood about myself, I think it felt quite a sort of high concept, the idea of, like, you know, are you good at saying no? I'm like, well, it's just a word. But actually, I didn't really understand what that meant. Whereas now I have a much better relationship with kind of what is supportive for myself, for others, and how, you know, and how you can say no to something while still being a good person. I thought that saying no just meant that you were lazy, but actually that often saying no means that you're, what's the quote that's like, saying no to something you don't want is saying yes to yourself, or there's something that sounds much better than that. But it is that thing. It's like the more able I am to say no, the better I am within the things that I say yes to. So surely that's a bit of a win-win situation. I've learned to get better at that.
Good. Yeah. Annie, it was so lovely talking to you.
You too. Thank you so much for having me. And I feel like I always feel at the end of these that I've just been blabbering on, but hopefully something in there was interesting. Thank you so much, lovely.
And you take care. If you enjoyed this episode of Priorities, I'd really appreciate it if you could make it your priority today to hit subscribe and also rate and review, as this helps other people find it. Need a little incentive? Every month, I offer one free 60-minute online coaching session to a listener. All you have to do is hit subscribe, rate, review the podcast, and then email a screenshot of your review to prioritiespodcast@gmail.com. You'll then be added into the ballot for a free one-to-one coaching session with me, in which we will help align the priorities of your life. Thank you so much for listening, and take care.